partnering with the Symphony and supporting it, it's an honor for us because it's an incredible institution with an incredible history, and as we say in Hawaii, a story. But at the same time, I think that what we want to bring to it is that childlike enthusiasm that we always felt. I think there's a big distinction between childlike versus childish. Childish would be something like making a silly photo on an Instagram app or something like that. It's okay, but you're 40 some odd years old, so you're going to do that all day. But if you do something childlike, that could be Picasso painting primitive symbols on a vase, So we try and bring that spirit to the partnership, and what we're really grateful for is that we love so many of the institutions in town, but honestly, historically for us, the Symphony is the Symphony is the one, and it was the first one, and it's the most enduring one for us in terms of longevity now, and we're committed for the very long term. So,
well, we're grateful for that tremendous support to the Symphony. So much of what we do here, because of our location, we couldn't do without wonderful partners like yourself and the Halekulani. So, very grateful.
Now, I had you to throw in one caveat. What Iggy said earlier is because now that he's built up such high expectations of your Halekulani experience that's coming up, we're really gonna now you got me in trouble because we'll really have to be on our toes when he shows up now. We'll have to double the staff.
Thanks, Iggy. Yeah, absolutely.
But you said yourself, you're not comparing the Halekulani to any other corporations. You set your standard yourself, and all you need to do is follow your vision.
I'm glad you brought that up because I always say this to our team at the hotels. It's a huge mistake, I believe, in business to ever compete. Why would you want to compete with anyone? Then you're putting yourself in a reactive position. And to Iggy's point, it's like a composer. Whatever came before you did, and the canon is important. But when you sit down with the pencil and score paper, you want to. Thelonious Monk said, a genius is a man most like himself. So we want to hear what Dave is composing. We want to hear what his idea is. And so it's the same thing. It's the same thing in business. Let's just envision what Halekulani should be, and then let's just live that out. And if we can do it well, we should do fine. We don't have to worry what the guy down the block and the guy up the street is doing. Of course, you want to be aware of your playing environment, just like you guys are aware of what other orchestras are doing. But that's not the basis on which you decide your vision, I would imagine, right? So.
Very much so, and I think that I've learned here especially that we have to be more reflective of our community here, and even in a landscape full of other nonprofits, we've learned to work together with them to build each other up, and I think that really this past year, what we've gone throughout the pandemic, I think it's more obvious than ever where that needs to be.
Right. I think that Hawaii is so unique in so many ways that if we simply I put it this way, I know in business for sure, I can promise you this, and you know this too, because you have to wear a business hat all the time, and you're a professional musician, but you're also a businessman, is that people tend to overthink today. I'm not sure it's because they're getting so many electronic waves emitted through their head, from the cell phones, but people will talk and think something to death. And I was reading recently a piece by the late Fred Astaire, who said that, and I can paraphrase it pretty well quickly if I can, he said to the effect that I find that when I share my creative ideas, my new creative ideas, with trusted friends, professional colleagues, and artists who I deeply respect and admire, that invariably it becomes diluted and falls apart. And so nobody would want to hear that today, because the cliche today would be the opposite, that please go and ask everybody for their input and so on and so forth. But his point was that he already had it. He had the vision. And when you keep going around saying, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? It's one thing to get input, but then at the end of the day, you have to sing your song, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we're saying the same thing. Yeah.
Dave, Peter mentioned the yin and yang, the left, right brain. So you're an executive director of our symphony, but you're also an artist, a musician. Do you find that you're able to combine those two parts of your brain in an effective manner?
I thought the tough questions were going to go to Peter this evening. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of internal debate. A conversation at the board of directors of the Fruit of the Loom in my mind about what's really going on, because at the end of the day, it's a business. We are a business with a community attached to it. And we have shareholders. Our shareholders are not only the 750 plus thousand people here on Oahu, but all of Hawaii, and all of the musicians and composers and conductors that we work with. And so I think there's a lot of struggle in that. There's a lot of debate, but I think that when you think about people first, whether it's our patrons, our musicians, our staff, our employees, and you make sound business decisions based on people first, you grow a business in a way that's organic, and I think one that really has purpose and is mission driven. And I think for a nonprofit, that really gets down to why we do what we do. We're here to serve other people. We're here to build community through music. What would you say the core mission of Halekulani is in your business model?
The way we answer that is of course there's the traditional business answers. You're in business for profit and all of those things. But the real core answer for us to be successful is create memories and hand them to people and let them go home with that. Yeah, and the other way we put it is, I think it's the same thing really in a way the symphony does, which is enrich people's lives. Let them leave that hall or let them leave that hotel. To me, there's no difference. More fulfilled and enriched than when they walked in. And also that they learned something, right? And I can't think of a better venue for learning than the way that you're designing the symphony experience, because it's very informative, and you know what's going on. I'm seeing more and more, the audience member knows what's going on, what they're hearing more than ever before the concert begins. And somehow you're doing that without the traditional printed program now. So I'm fascinated by that, and I'd like to be able to explain that to my marketing team when I talk to you separately.
Okay, all right.
Well, one person who definitely does not need program notes is you, Peter. We know that the arts and music plays a very big part in your life, but it started as a child. I believe your parents, you grew up in a very artistic family.
Yes, it was a really, I know everyone you meet says, my family's really strange, but my family...
Where was that strange family?
This was very strange, just north of New York City. And my father was a first-generation Russian immigrant who escaped the Bolsheviks and came out and won a child's piano competition and got into music school in Chicago, and then came to New York City and played Nickelodeon piano in the silence. And then eventually, when in the 1930s, when sound got to film, the studios didn't know what to do, because they thought there couldn't be anything lower than composing for a film. That's what the belief was. And so they came and they got these young guys playing for $1 a week in the silent cinemas on the piano, and they said, can you arrange? And he lied and said he could, and he figured it out. But he had this natural aptitude. And then he had 5 children, eventually all boys. And we found it didn't seem that hard to play instruments as it did for a lot of kids in the band. I don't know if any of us had any very early ambitions, but we did love it. We grew up in a very musical household. And this is a really great message for anybody watching who, if your parents at home with really small kids, it is 2 E's, education, exposure. My mother filled the house with books. And so by the time you're 18, even if you don't really care what she has on the shelf, you're going to read all the books in the house by the time you're 18. It's almost 2 decades. So you learn a lot. And that was very subtle and clever on her part. All my brothers were musicians. Some went on professionally. Others chose other careers. But the importance of the arts to us was now they'll say intersectional or cross-disciplinary. Interdisciplinary. So you've got these very long words, almost as long as German words that would explain those things. But what it really meant in simple terms is a song, is a poem, is a symphony, is a painting, is a photograph, is a sculpture, is a dance. We were taught it's all just another way of saying the same thing. And however you wish to express it, you can. But that's the environment we grew up in. So,
And how did you express it? Through which instrument?
well, for me was originally trumpet, and then I liked to arrange and orchestrate. I grew up and I went to conservatory for 2 years in New York City at Mannes, classical. But I was always my whole life also a huge jazz fan. My father had me on Louis Armstrong, Miles Davis when I was in my single digits, and so when I got to New York City, I was torn because I had I had Carnegie Hall on 57th. You know the setup.
Yeah.
And then you get on the train down the west side to the Village, and you're in the Village Vanguard. So I was living both worlds for a really long time, and then I moved away from that as the business career took off over time, and then many years later. Kind of came full circle in the other direction. It was actually the symphony experience that really brought me back to the symphonic world, but sitting at the other side of sitting in the audience instead of on the stage. So I hope that might help me bring something to it. But I also learned much more about what musicians go through by seeing it from the outside in than seeing it from the inside out. And I would have thought it would have been the opposite. So I learned a lot from the musicians in the symphony, and I continue to do so.
Absolutely, and still play.
Yeah, I still play periodically. Yeah, we have a sort of kind of a third stream experimental free jazz quartet, quintet, depending how many guys we have in, and we play every week or two on the weekends, and we play mostly for ourselves. We consider it a creative conversation, and every once in a while you might catch us playing around town at one of the museums or galleries or something like that. So.
The jazz training, did you just grow up, or did you train, or?
I did both. I mean, one of my teachers before I went to conservatory was a major jazz player in New York, a studio guy. But then my improvisation studies at NYU were actually with a bassist, which was Abdul Malik, who was really big in the bebop and post-bop days with Monk and Coltrane and so forth. And I was absolutely terrified when I walked in a room alone with him. And he ended up being the sweetest person I ever met in my life. So my exposure was really multifold at the same time. Yeah.
Am I wrong to say that you're speaking about New York, but you also, in order to pay some bills, you worked as a bartender in Studio 54, and which
right.
reminds me, Dave, should we have a toast, or what are we drinking?
Yeah, we completely forgot. We have our wonderful charcuterie plate from Terry at Hosser Wines, a wonderful sponsor of ours for the entire Tuning Up series here. And I believe we have a bottle of wine this evening. Iggy, what are we not drinking this evening?
We are, well, for the trivia question, the winner will get a Résonance wine, which is a Willamette Valley, I believe, from Southern Oregon. And we were, during the briefing section, thinking of a trivia question, and I believe, Peter, you came up with a trivia question for our viewers.
Right, which is, it sounds simple, but maybe somebody will know this. I hope so. In what year did the original Halekulani open?
Great. And you can text that answer to the number below on your screen. Donard.
So
there
Peter,
you go.
Peter, is there a school of mixology to get into Studio 54? Or?
I'm sorry to age myself by saying that the school that I went to, the International Bartending School on 7th Avenue and 23rd Street, shut its doors about 25 or 30 years ago. Maybe it's after they experienced me trying to graduate. But yeah, that was the disco era, and I actually, born in December, I was in my I was 17 when I went into the city to college. I was the young guy, and so I was pretty green in every possible way. But then I decided, bartending was a big hot thing then, and I heard, you make good money fast, and you could work at night because classes were during the day in the school. So I went to this international bartending school, and it was really tough in those days. They wanted you to make all the classic cocktails from the 30s and 40s, and it wasn't actually that easy to graduate that school, which tells you the limits of my academic ability. But I did a few years, and it had a brief stint. Studio 54 was one of several nightclubs, and I honestly, at that age, to see that, I was probably 18 or 19 then. I'm still trying to figure it out. But I was there.
So mixology music, but you also went to business of the arts, or?
Well, I did business and the arts at NYU, and then I studied global business at Oxford. But I did that many years later, many years later, where I felt that what I had learned at NYU was then so many years old in terms of business, and the world had changed so much that I needed to go back to school. So I did, and it really gave me a real mix. And having said that, I also like to write. So at Oxford at night, instead of doing my business studies, which I should have been doing because it wasn't easy, I'd go to the libraries or the Bodleian Library, whatever, and you know, plunge into the poetry section, the fiction section, because you're there, you have to do it, right? Yeah. So it's always, I think this all comes down to this, you know, it's a curiosity.
Thirst for knowledge.
It's a thirst for knowledge. What you talked about earlier from a Renaissance outlook or anything polymathic, you know, the American diagnosis of that contemporarily is probably ADHD, you know? So usually though, if I give a talk to a group now, whether it's business or aesthetics and art or something, we've talked about that, what I usually say if I have 30, 40 minutes is for those of you in the audience who are very focused, methodical, and organized, I'm gonna lose you really quickly, but I promise to loop you back in by the end of the presentation because I think people should be able to, I think we've lost the ability, in an age of hyper-information, I think we've lost the ability to forget. And everything is not important. A friend of mine asked me recently, don't you remember 2 years ago we saw that movie, it's on TV now, and it wasn't very good. And I couldn't remember even going with him. And he was upset with me. And he said, how could you not remember? And I said, because it wasn't worth remembering. So I think it's really worth forgetting things. And by forgetting things, you'll remember the things that matter much more. So for example, if you forget the performances you've seen that you don't enjoy, didn't connect with, for whatever reason, then when you go in and you're having that epiphany in a concert hall watching the Hawai'i Symphony, for example, and you just feel your skin, you know, you feel your hand shake, and you say, my God, I think I'm gonna sit here and cry with what I'm hearing. That, you can get that crisper by letting go of all the ancillary garbage of information that we're being flooded with, particularly in cell phones. And so I'm not good at it, but I'm trying.
Which reminds me, I read somewhere, and please don't quiz me because I'm really not very good at French literature, but Marcel Proust said something that, you know, talks about a lot about memories and the effect they can have on someone's life. And so, you know, I don't know if all French people know this. These are called Madeleine.
Right, yeah.
Right? From the À la recherche du temps perdu. And so that he remembers, I guess, the moment where his mother gives him a Madeleine, and it brings all those memories back. So tell us about your perspective on Marcel Proust and why you think he's such an important author.
This is really, really important, and I know that I can't say this literally, but for me, I argue that he's the most significant fictional writer since Shakespeare. And the reason I argue that is, one, is to pick fights, you know, with friends so that I can't win or lose. But the other reason, the real reason, to your point, is that what Proust was specifically referring to in the trigger when his relative, as a boy, gave him that Madeleine dipped in lime tea, and it had a certain taste and feeling to it and smell. Years later, he smelled something like that, and it triggered his memory of his grandmother and his mother. And his point in memory, in my opinion, in simple terms, is that he's talking about involuntary memory, what you can't control. Back to the cell phones, all of this, and it dovetails what you asked right off the previous point. We want to harness and control this and know everything and be able to talk about anything, politics, arts, music, sports, and we think it's all right here in the phone. And what's happening is we're trying to remember everything. And once you try to remember it, it's no longer, it's not involuntary, it's voluntary memory. You're trying to control what your brain is going to retain. And it's a really also a vicious trap, because I think when so many people get older and memory starts to go for so many people, it's more of a disappointment to people who thought that they could hold on to it all. I personally personally can't wait to forget some things as I'm already getting older, because of the fact that I'm hoping that a lot of what I end up forgetting was useless information anyway. So Proust's point is, live in the moment and don't try and do things where, my God, I'm having a yogurt and I'm going to take a photograph and send it to my friends on social media. Your life is short. Come up with something more valuable to contribute to them and yourself and society than doing childish things like that. And what Proust was saying is, live, and you're going to get almost attacked in a severe way at times by involuntary memories. And when it's a synesthetic thing in the sense that the blending of the sentences. When I watch the symphony perform, I'm praying for a synesthetic moment where I get triggered, Proustian style, involuntary memory. You guys play something that is so ethereal that I wasn't ready. It's like when you go to a Broadway show and that beautiful tune and you just feel like you want to cry. That's involuntary emotion. And so I say, dump some of the tech and let's get back to this. It's very visceral. It's raw living. That's my feeling.
What is the earliest musical memory you have?
Probably, well, obviously, like the first ones would be my father playing the piano very, very early, and that he was very tongue-in-cheek, kind of the vaudeville thing where he'd go up and the key would stick, and he'd smack it again after a run and then pick it up and make a face, So there was humor to music, that we should never take anything too seriously or not be able to laugh at ourselves. But the second memory I have is the first time as a boy, maybe I was 5 or 6, and he gave me a Louis Armstrong album called Satch Plays Fats, the music of Fats Waller. And I cried at that age when I heard that record, because it's when musicians when they really are telling the truth. There's no other way to put this. It's so hard we spend our lives trying to talk about this, right? But it's so real, it's so true, it's so truthful that I was absolutely astonished. And to this day, I listen to that same album in my car driving around here, and it's as fresh as the day I heard it. So those are very early memories for me. Yeah.
Photographic memory, or you mentioned people taking a photo of a fruit and it goes on a social media platform. But if the aesthetic is there, then there's validity. Can we maybe I want to show you a shot that you actually took that was years and years ago.
And that's you, right?
And that's not why I want to show it.
You look the same, you look the same.
But
yeah.
Tell us, because we talked about your business of the arts, your musical upbringing, but there's also photography. You've taught photography at UH, right?
Yeah, at several schools. There's so little time I can find to do it, but I really love it because what I'm learning from young photographers is they see the world in a whole nother way. And as they say, you learn from your students, right? And God forbid they learn from you. But yeah, photography for me, it's another. I'm interested in the human form. In the human, and that's where this also ties in with Shakespeare and Proust. It's the great Harold Bloom book on Shakespeare. He called it the invention of the human. He captured every type of human character. So I love photography, but I have a problem, and I wrestle with my whole life the constraints of photography. It's really conventional. It's usually a square or a rectangle. It's usually framed. And people, when you show your photography, they'll always ask you now, I like that, is that on film or digital? And what you want to say is, what difference does it make? To me, I've never been very interested in process. I mean, it's fascinating to see somebody make a musical instrument or something. That does interest me to see. It's fabulous. But when people say, well, how did you make that? For me, it's not the point. It's everything. For me, it's all about the end print. It's about the end print. So again, it's another way of seeing something beautiful or terrible and capturing it and sharing it with people. There's a difference between that for me and a lot of social media photography, right, where in a lot of social media we're desperately trying to retain everything that happened to us to memorialize ourselves. And I don't think that, I only figured this out recently, it's like American presidents. I don't think that at the end of a term one should be working on their own legacy. I think that's immature. I think you should be working on legacy of the people around you. And that's why something like an orchestra is really organic in that sense. It's that the only thing we know about this orchestra is no matter what we do, we're all involved in different ways. It will be here when we're gone. It's a legacy institution. So the question, the only thing that matters is what can we do to make sure of that while we're here. So it's not about me, it's about them. But it took me my whole life to really figure this out.
To ensure the legacy of your institution.
Well, the fundraiser in me would say legacy gifts would be helpful to ensuring that too. But I picked up on something you just said, and I want to ask from a business perspective. You mentioned not being focused on the process. Does that transfer into business for you as well?
Yes, because as important as a business process is, it's a function or a way of getting the goal. So for example, in business, a budget's critical to have and achieve, but it's simply really a numerical reflection of your plan. It's a way numbers would express the plan, right? So when people say, let's work on the budget because next year's coming up, my answer is no, let's work on next year and then pen it in the budget. So I don't think Wagner said, let's work on a score. No, he said, let's work on Rheingold, whatever, right? So that's just my own approach.
Yeah.
I'm curious. I mean, for you, if it's, I mean, coming from a musical background, I know you're asking the questions, but I'm curious. You're leading a dual. You have a duality to what you're doing because you've come up with the highest pedigree and performance in your career, but then at the same time, you're leading institutions that perform. I mean, how do you approach the vision issue?
Well, we're always limited by our capacity, and I think that's living within the means of an organization, especially one that's still growing, and one that's focused on the future. I think that is a challenging part to get to because there's so many things in play. Again, back to the people. We need the people in order to make what we do work, and so. I do take budgeting very, very seriously from a literal sense, but it's storytelling, and I think that's always one of the conversations I enjoy having in a finance meeting as well. This spreadsheet said this last time. Well, yeah, that was a snapshot in time. That was a photograph that at this time, this is what was happening, and here's the circumstances that changed that gets us to our goal of where we're trying to get to.
Okay, so then that's really helpful to me, and I'm going to steal some of that from my tomorrow at the office. But seriously, I have to drop back, and you make me think about a performance, and I'm going to say it was only several years ago, and you were featured in Scheherazade. Right? Okay. And I brought a friend in from out of town. They were sitting us, and they were just eating up this performance. And it was this spectacular rendition of Scheherazade, and it was just absolutely captivating. And as this is going on, one of my friends leaned over to me, and is not a musician, and said, "Oh, this is great. I wonder what he's thinking," referring to Iggy. And I look up, and Iggy's playing violin, and he's constant. And all I could say was, thinking? Thinking? Again, overthinking. The person in the audience has to, there's this saying, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, So the way that she's been taught to think in her life is very linear. So when she sees this thing of beauty happening before her eyes, she needs to put it through her filter. She doesn't realize it consciously, but it's got to go through her processing filter to say, what am I experiencing? And I think that if it's a symphony, if it's a hotel, if it's a book of poetry, if it's done really wonderfully, what happens is it's an unexplainable, transformative experience. That you don't need to understand what happened. You only need to know how you feel. When people taste wines, and with hotels, we do this all the time professionally, and I've never pretended to be a wine expert because they're too much produced. You can't keep up. But people will do a wine tasting, and they typically say to you, well, what do you smell? What do you taste? Do I smell cherries, and I smell molasses, and I smell tobacco? And that's fun to do. But to me, it doesn't say anything. What I want to know when you taste the wine is, I'm going to ask it Proustian style, which is, did that just jog you in terms of your life experience or your memory? It's like the Madeleine. Did tasting that wine, all of a sudden you thought about a Saturday with your father when you were a boy, or going to your grandparents' house and then pouring, you could see the crystal out, some kind of a memory. That's what living is all about. It's not just now, or what we're always talking and planning for the future. why not live in the past sometimes? Why not go backwards and say, I want to feel Tchaikovsky. I want to picture him in that room, stuffing his pipe with tobacco. We're not supposed to say that now. And what was going on? And not only with him, what was going on in Russia then? What was going on in Russian literature, Russian dance, Russian cuisine? And when you start to put that all together, so with Proust, he used to go to the Ritz Paris, and he would go to the L'Espadon, the dining room. And what did Proust eat? These are things I think about. Maybe there is something wrong with me, but why not ponder what you can never get an answer to? And that's part of the symphonic experience. Like they say with philosophy, great philosophy leaves you with more questions than answers. And I think when you leave the concert hall, you want to leave literally mystified more than when you walked in. You walked in from work, I got the tickets, sit down, I had a rough day at the office. And then when you're walking out, like I've got to go down here and I'm going to Hosford's to get a bottle of Stag's Leap, whatever, right? So I want to take that home and then I want to drink it and I want to think Proustian again. Mm-hmm. So we have to have the capacity, we have to develop the capacity to surrender to ourselves. And I wouldn't pretend to be an expert at that at all, but I'm aware of it as a construct which I can aspire to. So I think that the symphony gives me the biggest high in that regard because it can knock you straight over in your seat. So,
and it doesn't matter what budget we have, that's what we're shooting for. It doesn't matter if we had $5 or $50.
Well, and it doesn't matter if we have 5 people or 2,000 people at the Waikiki Shell. And, I think that that's the relationship between wine and the symphony that I always find so interesting is that, when you open a bottle of wine, you're opening it and it's exposed to the air and it tastes the way it does because of everything that's happening in the theater here tonight. And I'm going to remember drinking this with Iggy and Peter. I'm not going to necessarily remember that it's a bottle of Stag, but I am going to remember who I drank it with. And I think the symphony experience is similar. And I think that what gives me hope is that, we're coming out of this pandemic where we've experienced everything, on a flat surface. As realistic as we can make that, someone else is making the choice for you of what you're seeing on stage. But for us to return to performances and to share that experience, there's a reason why our communities have gathered for hundreds of thousands of years around religious ceremonies, music, all of these sorts of things because they impact us and it's who we're with. And so I think it's that sense of place, especially at the Waikiki Shell with the lawn and all of those sorts of great things that we can experience that are so important to our vitality as a performing arts organization.
And you and I had a related recent conversation where we were talking about, I think, the fact that in an orchestra, if you think about it in a beautiful way, there's a primitivism about it for all the sophistication, because if you look at how the sound's generated, we all know that everything is vibrated, whether it's a brass instrument, a bow on string, a drum being struck, everything is vibrated. Sound is created by vibration, right? Mm-hmm. And you have these different natural materials, but they're all organic because you're using resin from trees to wax the bow, and you've got gut strings, and you've got skin on percussion instruments, and you've got brass as a metal, from the Bronze Age, and you've got wood in all the instruments. Then you have the wood winds with wind and wood, and they're carving reeds. They're carving actual reeds to play the instrument, right? So when I think about it, it's the most what's the word I'm looking, primeval artistic experience. The only thing that can match it for me is dance, because somebody can figuratively, without even shoes or clothes, can dance around, and or the voice, right? Coming right from the human. But this is all, again, different ways of saying the same thing. And with this, the quality of this orchestra in this setting in Honolulu, it is such a gift to the community that anyone, it doesn't matter if, I hear people say, well, I don't know if I like classical music, or I don't know anything about it. It doesn't matter. We don't, as non-musicians, don't know anything about rock and roll, but they go to the concert, right? So why not go to the concert? And I think that it's not only investment, for example, again, if you're parents, it's not only an investment in entertainment or for your children. The girl who came and heard the orchestra a couple of years ago, and just before COVID, and then said to her mother, and her mother told me this, after the concert was over, and there were singers, and she said, number one is, I got 3 questions to her mother. She said, number one is, why haven't you taken me to this before? Number 2 is, what's the next program? And number 3 was, can I take voice lessons? And that's what this girl said to her mother. And I asked her, how old's your daughter? And she said 5. So that, to your point, it's not about how many people in the audience or how much, it's about transformational experiences that improve people's behavior, outlook on life, and enrich the community in ways that can't be measured. You know, in business, it's so funny because everybody says, well, that's not valuable if it can't be measured. It has to be measured. Whatever you do has to be measurable. But I'd argue just the opposite. I'd say, you know, the things, if you think etymologically, the things in life that are truly precious, we call them immeasurable, or we call them priceless. We call them priceless. And you cannot measure the most valuable things. It's not gold or silver or Bitcoin. It's a memory that you take right from birth to the grave, and no one can ever take that away from you once you've experienced it, right? And that's what I think, frankly, the Symphony and the hotel, we're doing the same thing. We're creating experiences and memories and trying to enrich people, and then let them go home, they'll figure it out. And hopefully, not necessarily in one big way, but over time, it gradually changes their lives, right? So that's the mission, I think, right? So,
absolutely.
So we're honored to be able to support the Symphony, and I would just also say, corporations, not just individuals, corporations out there, we all can't give to everything, but if any of this makes sense to you and you're not right now, and I was not asked to say this, is the rewards for your own company and employees, present and future, because the young people may end up working for you who go to the Symphony, get involved, because I don't think it's an option. I actually think in a positive, constructive way, it's a responsibility if we're responsible people and organizations in an intelligent community. So that's our spirit, and what do they say? Can't stop, won't stop.
Can't stop, won't stop. Yeah.
So obviously art was of paramount importance in your background, in your life. And you mentioned that art played also a very big part at the Halekulani. Did you find that the marriage between you and the Halekulani was a perfect blend because of your passion for the arts? You know,
I did. Yeah, I didn't know when I interviewed for the job, I was not aware of the depth of the arts and culture sponsorships they were doing. And again, the biggest commitments has always been the Symphony. So after I got in and got settled a little while, there was a poster on my wall of at the time the Honolulu Symphony. And I said to my assistant, "Wow, tell me about that." And she said, "We're sponsoring that." And I thought, wow, this is really, really, really neat. Let's get tickets and go. It was a delightful surprise, which are the greatest moments in life. And I did not know really what I was walking into at the time. And I was astonished that I had a parent company who actually understands this. And they're a global public corporation in Japan. So we're very, very fortunate to have their support. I couldn't do anything we're doing without my team, which makes it happen, and the parent company's support.
So I want to ask a question. This is I'm going to ask it to both of you because this past week, it was so wonderful. We had one of our Nahoku Opio, our young stars, Aaron Nishi, play the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. And, you know, it was watching a teacher sit just 3 or 4 feet away from where a student was performing was a fascinating dichotomy to watch. But I think this question that I have is you know, for the next generation of hospitality workers, for the next generation of musicians that join the orchestra, you know, what are the skills that we need to foster for the next 20 years so that when we have people entering the workforce, they are compassionate and they are good leaders and they can communicate both in business and in music? You know, the younger they are, my students, the more they can adapt. I think, you know, as opposed to me, I have my own ways. It's very for me sometimes to adjust. And there's no doubt in my mind that the next generation can adapt quickly and they can utilize the technology, the social media platforms and everything. But you mentioned the key word for me was just compassion and humanity. And I hope that
you have such an inundation of outside forces, computers, technology, that sometimes the human element gets forgotten, or the authenticity of a relationship can be forgotten. Everyone knows that one of my favorite books is The Little Prince. And he says, well, the fox tells the little prince, it's the time you have spent for your rose that makes her so important. Because there's a part in the book where the prince sees a bunch of roses and he doesn't understand the difference. But then he realizes that what makes his rose special is the time he's lost for her. And so I hope that the next generation never forgets that.
Wow, that's fascinating. I think that there's so much music. Music is principally listened to digitally now, and I think we all know those are a series of ones and zeros, and as fine as the technology is now, to me it's a little bit similar to film negatives versus digital memory on cameras. There is a certain difference in the warmth and the range and the bandwidth, literally, of these mediums, right? And what I hear with some younger musicians when they play now, even if they play beautifully, they sometimes, if you close your eyes live, they sound like it's a digital recording because they've grown, my theory is that they've grown up listening to everything on digital. But then I've also had the opposite experience where I'm astonished that here's this really young person and it's safe. This music's, it's being taken on by the next generation now, and I feel so happy. But one of the reasons also, I think they listen to, millennials are big on vinyl. I have 2 millennial daughters, and they're crazy LP collectors. And so I think that what you talked about is this idea that, where we have these cliches. Every 20 years we say, oh, young people, they know everything. I don't know what knowing something means, what people mean by that. And I think it's not about knowing things, it's about not knowing about things and being, again, receptive and surrendering. To your point, that there's this compassion and sensitivity and passion, and that there is still the ability today for them acoustically, and digital music's great too, performances, but acoustically to bring out their voice, who they are,
Absolutely.
whatever they play, right? Whatever they play. So I believe now, a few years ago I was more skeptical. I'm starting to see that it's not about the generation, or it's not about time or what year. It's about cultivating young people, and I think the teachers, like you're giving a young person a lesson, wow, you got the world in your hands there, and it's such a precious, important thing, but what a beautiful thing to see that person walk out and then play a concerto. I can't even imagine what that's like, because I wasn't that good a teacher. So.
But also, as teachers, we have a lot to learn from the students, like you mentioned that earlier, and it's so true. Peter, can we get a little technical and ask you about updates about the Halekulani Waikiki, about the Halekulani?
Sure. Yeah, it's really simple. The news, we finally figured it out. We were planning a big renovation just when COVID hit at Halekulani. And then we realized that if we didn't jump on it while things were slow, that we would then reopen and then have to close again for another 1 to 2 years, which would be really immensely unfair to the employees who are already suffering because of COVID. So the long story short is that the renovations are going very well. We've got a lot of beautiful new elements to add to the hotel and introduce, and everybody's been working hard and well. And Halekulani will reopen on October 1st. Its sister hotel across the street, the former Waikiki Park, many of you know, which is Halapuna by Halekulani now, Halapuna Waikiki, that is opening in just, I think, 16 days. It's on July 1st. So that's coming up first, and everybody's gradually getting back to work. So we're really grateful, and I can't even tell you, our staff, we're so blessed. We had people who are furloughed and trying to make ends meet and worried about their health, and they were calling us or writing me letters and cards and notes, and or seeing them in a supermarket and over the last year and change, and saying, how can we help get the hotels back open? So it's been, again, we learned from our people like we learned from the students. It was amazing, and it's been very humbling for us, and we're getting close. So this is the year of transition. We're going back into business, and that will allow us to also do our partnering events as we've done in the past at the hotels as well. And we're really humbled, but we're really grateful. We figure, and I think it's probably the same with the Symphony, if an enterprise can survive what we've all just come through, then you can survive anything. Having said that, we're really cognizant. We all know so many people who have not survived, who have perished because of COVID-19, and it's a horrible global tragedy. But one of the ways I think we can honor their memory is collectively is to learn the lessons that COVID taught us about simplicity, about family, about work, about life balance, about art and culture and music and how vital it is. I never really knew until COVID hit, and so I think that it's a very mixed blessing, and we can all become better people and a better community from that.
And to me, as I'm getting older, COVID or no COVID, as you're getting older, your loved ones are starting to ail more and more. So it's time to cherish. And for me, it was a coincidence that COVID happened at the same time, so I've been affected both ways. But Dave, you're too young, but
Thank you.
I had a question for both of you. So Dave has had to talk to the musicians, the employees of the orchestra, during the pandemic and as the concert started. During the pandemic, with the Halekulani employees, have you had to talk to all of them at once, or how have you had to communicate with them?
Right. Well, the first thing is we decided that it's really vital that we do communicate. That was the first thing, because there are a lot of businesses who closed for a long time. People got furloughed, and you wait for the call if you're ever going to come back. And we thought that's really wrong, because people stay at our hotels really not for the building or anything. They stay for the staff, and as you know, they know the staff very well. So what we did is we did a couple of things. One is in person. So we did regular monthly food events where we would do drive-bys, and you drive up and show your employee badge, and we did food supplies. So we did grocery bags and boxes and cartons and things like that. On Thanksgiving, we did baked hams, the chef baked hams for everybody. We have 1,000 employees, so it wasn't easy. And then Christmas was turkeys, and then Christmas was baked ham and food for the family. We had an intranet software program that we used to communicate, send out notices, messages, and if it was a major announcement, what I tried to do is do a video of myself talking to them directly, and they can pull that up even on their cell phone while they're at the store or out in the street or something. And then we had people writing us handwritten letters, and I made sure that whenever I got that from an employee, I took a pen and paper out and I sat down for an hour or so and I wrote them a letter back, because I was so touched that they would actually write directly. And then, the same thing I'm sure you had, you bump into each other we're all in the same places. I'm at Target. Really, people have these wrong ideas about some corporate people. I'm at Target, I'm at the supermarket, I'm at the gas station, I'm getting my safety check on the car, my tire's flat. And so we run into each other in the damnedest places. And those were the strongest moments, because you'd say, wow, and all they would say is we hope the hotel's well and we can't wait to come back. And so we're just really blessed. So we stayed in very close touch as we could throughout, and now they're back at Halekulani in training. And I talked to the new group this morning and yesterday, and it was a very emotional experience to see everybody come back in and charged up in their uniforms. So the sun's coming back out. As you said, over the shell, it's the same with the sky over your head and the stars. It's metaphorical, right? So
when you hire a new executive chef, do you ask them to tell you about their experience, or the Escoffier culinary school, or the Ritz in Paris, or does it have a history behind their cooking, or do you just ask them to cook something?
Well, I think it's both. We already have the resume, so we know the background. We've probably eaten wherever they've worked, or we wish we had, but we can't afford their prices. Part of it's intuitive. It's like talking to a musician. You kind of get a feeling before you play together. It's kind of similar in that way, because so many of them are artists. But then we do ask them to cook. And the unfair part about that is, can you imagine being a chef and you fly and you're on jet lag and you're in someone else's kitchen and you don't even know the assistants, and then you're going to cook in an oven you never cooked in, and all these guys, corporate guys, are sitting outside waiting, with the knife and the fork to taste your food and judge you. So it's not easy. But then On the other hand, in the music business, you've got orchestra auditions, right? I think
Right.
there's still is this curtain
There's a
audition?
screen, yes.
Yeah, so for those not trained as musicians, they will go and apply for an orchestra position and have to perform where on the other, who's sitting on the other side of the screen? The conductor, yourself,
A judging
Dave.
panel, yes.
Yeah, there's a judging panel, and then you hear that, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I brought that up because we had Chef Mavro on the
Yeah.
show a few months ago, and hello, Chef.
Yeah.
And he was at the La Mer
Right,
at
right.
Halekulani for a while.
Mavro, is really a brilliant and versatile chef, and I always think of him, nothing against any of the other chefs who I love on this island, but Mavro for me is particularly youthful because his energy is so, it's so focused and relentless, but he also has a sense of humor and a balance, and he was one of the chefs who put the early Halekulani on the map in its current iteration, as well as La Mer, the restaurant itself. So we're forever grateful. We've got it's sort of Halekulani family out in the community working elsewhere. So it's we always say when they leave, you're part of the family, always part of the family. So yeah, it's an artistic endeavor, and if it's not, then that person doesn't get the job, right? So. Yeah.
What does the future of symphonic music look like with the Hawai'i Symphony and here in our community?
I'm probably not the most qualified to answer that at all, but I can maybe answer it as a consumer who knows something about the medium. I think that, I know that we are in an era now with the arts where, understandably, to a very reasonable degree, at least, artists in all different mediums have stepped up to the plate with political issues going on, equality issues going on, racial issues going on, and so on and so forth. And I think back even just last century, you can go back to Guernica by Picasso, and you talk about the Spanish Civil War and what he did with that painting. But you can go back into the 18th century and also the Enlightenment and even the Reformation. And there's tremendous amount of work done by artists with political commentary. So it's actually not new, it's always been the case. But what I do argue for is that, and with symphonic music too, is that there are two avenues here. One is messaging, and the other one is what I'd call beauty for beauty's sake. And I think they're both important, and I think that programming in symphonic music should have a counterbalance. There's a lot of concern about who wrote what and where they came from now and everything else. And I think it's, I'm not interested in the composer, I'm interested in the art. I'm not saying I'm not interested in the artist or the composer, but in the old days of opera, in the 18th and 17th centuries, you would go anywhere from Rameau to Wagner. Dave, better than me, you've run opera companies. People went to the opera because they wanted to hear, they wanted to see the story of Falstaff, or they wanted to see Othello. Maybe they went because it was Verdi and he's a great composer, but they didn't. Today they go because of who's singing the lead roles. People would say at the Met years ago, I'm going to the Met and I'm going to see Caballé sing Traviata. And it's understandable, but I think that art, to me, is higher than politics. I think it's higher than gender. I think it's higher than pettiness politically or socially by people who, better for worse, run our cities and countries and around the world. And so I think art needs to remember that it should be independent, pristine. It's why it shouldn't be censored. And I hope to see more people from different places in the world, ages and everything else, with symphonic composing. But whatever they do, I'd like to see how far they can push the limits of creativity with actually a somewhat traditional orchestral, what am I trying to say, instrumentation, but tell a whole new story. It comes back to what you said about story. So I think it's limitless. I think it's limitless. Yeah.
That's a tremendous segue, because we hope you'll join us next Tuesday at 7:30 p.m. for Tuning Up. We have a wonderful young composer, musician, artist, Leila Hualanzalati, who will be joining Iggy and I for a conversation. And we're going to pick up right here with this conversation, I'm sure. So this wasn't even planned. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah. Okay, I'll be watching.
Yeah, absolutely.
You bet.
And we need to announce our winner. So what year was the Halekulani?
Right, 1917.
Wonderful. And so our winner this evening is Helen Wong. Sorry, Donard.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Yes, Helen.
Okay, great. Enjoy that great wine.
Yes.
That's so great. Thank you
Absolutely.
for knowing that.
Yes, well, and thank you for joining us this evening. It was such a pleasure to spend time with you, and we'll have you back tomorrow morning. We can do this all over again, and yeah, really
Keep the wine.
appreciate the support of the Halekulani for our Masterwork series, and excited for our future together.
You bet we're in for the long run. And thanks for having me here. Thanks. to
Thank you
both
so
of
much, Peter. Very
Thanks so much.
enlightening.
Good night.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
have a great night, and we'll see you next Tuesday. And get tickets for the rest of the Sheraton Starlight series at the Waikiki Shell.